All right, it is going. Welcome to Overgrow the System to Shudra, the Shudra way.
Pleasure to be here.
It's exciting. Is this your unveiling to the internet as a human being?
It pretty much is. This is where everyone finds out I'm not actually black.
You're not that anarchy ball.
Exactly. I remember when Sally Mayweather first had a photo or went on YouTube or something, and everyone's like, "Wait, you're not black?"
Well, his avatar is actually a human being.
Well, true. So yeah, that I suppose that takes it a bit further. Mine's just a grey and black ball.
And those are the Agorist colors, right? For the gray and
Say
black
again?
market. Those are the Agorist
Yes,
colors?
yes. Yep, grey and black markets, the only markets we like to deal in.
Of course, yeah. I mean, ideally. You are probably one of the most hardcore agorists I have met. Like you're living the permaculture off-grid life, eh?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, that's where I want to take things and where I see things going in the future. I might be a little more cutting edge than the agorists have wanted, but I'm finding my own way.
Yeah, I mean, you got to do it your own way. It's specific to you, right?
Exactly. I'm finding what does and doesn't work and what may or may not work for individuals. There are some things I'm doing that may be left to other people to do and others to purchase from them. Yeah, I don't expect everyone to do everything on their own, but you got to test what happens. You got to test what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, it's like you got to eat an elephant one bite at a time, eh?
Exactly.
Yeah. Don't go too big too soon.
Well, I'm probably am going too big too soon, but someone's got to test the waters to see what does and doesn't work, and I may as well be one of those people.
It seems like you're not choking on it. You got a pretty wicked garden from what I'm seeing.
There's a bit of work there. I've probably picked one of the worst areas to try the gardening with bottomless gravel. That doesn't help.
Oh,
So
geez, really?
but then again, that's teaching you the fundamentals. The fundamental is to build soil, and so if you can build soil on top of a car park, as people have done for demonstrations, I should be able to build soil and a healthy humus layer on top of endless gravel. Trap
I
the
mean,
water in the top layer.
the soil is the whole game, you know. If you can
Exactly, yeah.
you get that going, you got everything going.
It's only the top few inches that the plants mainly feed off anyway. So, and that should be sitting on top of the endless gravel. So if I keep the water up there in a sponge, it doesn't matter what's below.
Unless that gravel eats all your soil, you know, just soaking it in.
Well, yeah, exactly. So the more fungus and mycelium and plant hair roots I can keep in that soil, the more they're going to hold the water and prevent it from dropping down. And the trees are welcome to send their tap roots down into the soil and pull up all the minerals and nutrients that they need down there. So hopefully it
Absolutely.
all comes together and starts to work.
The web intermingling.
Exactly. The nature's information superhighway, the fungal mycelium.
Absolutely. The fungus. Apparently, the biggest organism in the entire world is a species of aspen tree somewhere in the States where they're all just, the roots are connected and it goes miles.
Oregon, I believe it is. It's apparently that tree sends up suckers. So all it's been doing is just moving out, sending up a sucker. And I guess if there's no interference by humans or grazing animals, it can be, and the conditions are good for it, it can keep going as far as it can.
Just infinite, the whole frickin' continent, one tree.
That wouldn't work because the monoculture is
Yeah.
inherently unstable. So something's going to come in and take it down. But if it's existing healthy on its own and there's other diverse trees around it, yeah, there's no reason it can't keep going.
You actually remind me that I did read that it was actually suffering from a disease, and obviously once it starts, it's going to take the whole frickin' thing.
As long as it's got a healthy fungal layer, that's where the information superhighway comes into it. The fungus at one end is telling the fungus at the other end that there's some sort of predator on the trees. So the trees that aren't affected yet will have time to start producing whatever they need to do to fight that disease when it does turn up. So that's where it all comes into the healthy root layer.
Absolutely. I mean, hopefully. It'd be a shame if that whole, like, I guess they're all clones of each other and they all go down. That's quite a loss.
Yeah, well, they're not so much clones as in it's the same tree. If you were to like separate one of those trees from its main taproot and take it 100 kilometers away, yes, then that would be a clone. But for the moment, it's all one. As long as they can talk to each other, they should be okay.
Interesting. Very interesting. So it's interesting that you are in literally the absolute opposite situation as I am in almost every way. Like, you're on the other side of the continent. I mean, the other side of the planet. It's nighttime there when it's day here. It's summer there when it's winter. It's crazy.
It's pretty much the exact opposite. I think the eastern seaboard of the US is exactly 12 hours away. So that probably does make it easier, because you just got to change your AM to your PM and you know what time it is.
It was a nightmare lining this up between our time zones. It fricked with my head because it changes day.
9 hours seems to be the sweet spot for confusion.
That was tough. Kept fucking that up. But we finally got her lined up. We can talk about the Shudra way. So I guess a good place to start is what the heck does the Shudra way mean?
Okay, that's a huge one. Shudra is an Indian word. It's from the 4 Indian caste systems. You got Shudra, which is peasant; Kshatriya, which is warrior or king or knight.
Right.
After that, you have Vipra, which is thinker or priest, and finally Vaishya, which is merchant. And in Hindu philosophy, it goes in something called the social cycle. So you start off with your hunter-gatherers, your peasants, which are the Shudra, and they're just going about their business. Then out of that comes one person who's a bit braver, a bit stronger, a bit more daring than the others, wants to chase the saber-toothed tiger a little bit further, a little bit harder. He becomes a natural leader, and he's the warrior.
The Robin Hood.
Kshatriya, which is more of a king or a chieftain or a strongman.
Right.
And so the other peasants gather around him, and he becomes the monarch, if you will. So that's the first level of government, is the monarch. What happens there is, while he's brave and strong, he doesn't know everything. So he gathers the wisest people of the village around to console him and to advise him. And so that's your advisors to the king, sort of thing.
Like Genghis Khan with all his smart generals.
Exactly. And what happens after a time is they think, well, we seem to be running this whole village. What do we need a king? Because the king, what will happen? He'll pass it on to his son. He'll pass it on to his son. He'll pass it on to his son. So the thinkers think, well, let's just get rid of the king and we'll run the place. And that becomes, you can either have a priest, a church run system of government, or you can have a state run system of government, and you have your wise men, and they get elected. And that becomes the next level, the thinker level, or the Vipra level. And then the final level is where the government needs one thing and one thing only to run efficiently, and that's money. So they start to surround themselves with merchants and businesses and corporations so that they can get the money. And then what naturally happens after that is the merchants think, well, what do we need these thinkers for? We're basically running the thing. They take over. And so you have the corporations running the place, which is more or less what we're having now. We still have remnants of monarchies. We still have remnants of elected governments, but really the corporations are running the place.
It sounds very reminiscent of late stage Rome, where they had the financiers and like the merchants, which rose so high in power that they overtook the senators.
That may well be a very small, neat version of what's happening globally now.
Yeah, it's crazy.
With international markets running pretty much everything, and of course the final stage is where, what do the markets need more than everything? It needs consumers, individuals, to spend the money. And eventually you get, and this is where the Shudra way comes into it, because we're now in a transitional period where the individuals are thinking, well, what do I need these corporations for when I can make my little widget and post it directly to somebody on the other side of the world who wants to buy my widget, and they can PayPal me, or even now with Bitcoin, they can send cryptocurrency directly to me. So I'm making a very unique custom widget for that person on the other side of the world. They're sending me cryptocurrency directly to my phone, and I'm then posting that product directly to them. So what we're slowly doing now is we're cutting out the corporations, and we're going back to subsistence, but we're not going backwards to subsistence. We're going forwards to subsistence, where, yes, I'm an individual, but I'm connected to everybody else in the world via my smartphone, and I can transact with everyone else in the world via my smartphone. So
New technologies.
Yeah. So that's the next level of peasant, where we don't answer to any governments, we don't answer to any corporations. If I want something, I will contact that person on eBay. eBay is a good prototype for what the new era is going to look like, where all your shopping is just a list of individuals who will make the product that you want. That's and we're slowly transiting into that era. So exciting times ahead.
Very exciting. Imagine the eBay of farming, where it's like, who will grow my crop for me? Oh, these many people will. And who's closest to you? It's wild.
Exactly. And you simply need to put out a bid. I need this much, a bushel of tomatoes, and somebody will say, well, I've got a bushel of tomatoes, I can offer you this. Somebody else will say, oh, I can offer you this, and you'll pick one. They'll have reputation scores, and you'll just select the person who's going to sell you their tomatoes.
It's funny how when you get into an argument with people about what you expect to happen in the future, they always go with what they view as the worst possible scenario, you know, like back to the Stone Age and beating each other over the head with clubs. And it's like, what?
Exactly.
Who's claiming to want that?
Yeah, and they're thinking in terms of going back to the peasant era is you have to go backwards. They can't see that there's a wheel. That's what's called the social cycle. There's a wheel where you naturally move forwards from the merchant era into the next peasant era, and take all your modern technology along with you. So that's the bit where they're missing.
New techniques for old technology, and new techniques for old technology, and new technology for old techniques. You know?
Exactly.
We got the best of both.
And I was listening to an argument you were having with your uncle on the podcast about food distribution systems. He's talking about how you need the trucks. Mm-hmm. You need the transportation, the environmentally harmful transportation to move all these goods and services around. But I think what's going to happen is if you look at Uber, for example, Uber's replacing taxis. Well, what's to stop someone pulling up their Uber app and saying, I'm here and I need to pick up a passenger to go somewhere, and at the same time they get a message there is a parcel to be picked up near where that passenger is, and we need that parcel to go slightly further than what the passenger is. So you pick up your passenger, pick up your parcel, take your passengers to where they need to be dropped off, get your money from them, take the parcel to the place where that needs to be dropped off, and that's how so you were taking the passenger anyway. Now some goods have been delivered at no extra cost because they've just gone in the boot of your car. Absolutely. And you've gotten a few cents. You've gotten a few cents from delivering that parcel, and that's how the tomatoes that I've ordered from that individual, they're not going to be delivered to me on a truck. They're going to have an Uber driver who's going to take it from one location to another location. Maybe it needs 3 Uber drivers to get it eventually to me, but over the course of the day, those tomatoes will be delivered to me at no cost to the environment, with no trucks involved, because those people were going that way anyway. And the algorithm in the app picked the best way to have the best drivers deliver that to me the most efficiently. So that's probably
That's a very ideal way to imagine getting rid of the centralization.
And that's, you can imagine that happening. It's just that the technology and the apps have to become just that little bit more sophisticated to enable people to know, oh, I have to pick up a package very close to my passenger and take them both to these locations. And that's just a matter of time. And I think that will be a more natural evolution than even more centralized, which is probably the wrong way to go.
Agreed, 100%. There's no better way to waste than to centralize, in my opinion.
Exactly. And instead of a truck being dedicated to take all these goods over this place, you got someone who's going that way anyway. And you have your Uber Eats people who are on bicycles, and there's nothing to stop them picking up a small widget from a collection centre along with their food delivery and taking it to the next collection centre. So it slowly bunny hops its way around the world. You could do that across the world.
And you don't have to involve the government in any stage of the procedure, right?
That's right, because the algorithm in the app it knows exactly where that parcel needs to go to and can determine, it can send out signals who would like to have a bid to take this parcel from this location or this location for $1. And slowly it makes its way around the world.
That's crazy to think of. But you're right, it does make sense, and it seems like it would naturally happen.
And now you're getting these electric cars coming in, and these electric cars are fully autonomous. Eventually they're going to be in the future. And you may just have cars, electric cars, just a person's sole job is to zip around, pick up as many parcels as he can, and drop them off at as many locations as he can, and try and maximize how much money he can get on each trip. So now you'll have people, the software will be trying to work out the most efficient way to take the most number of parcels, the least distance.
Yeah.
To get the most amount of profit at the end.
Or even automated cargo drones, just a mesh network of drones that deliver in different directions,
Yep, and Amazon, the so-called enemy of the people, as a giant corporation, it's already started that. It started doing the prototyping for all that. And one day you and I will own a drone, and maybe we'll charge the drone on our solar panels, send the drone down to the general store. We've already put in our order over the internet about what we want to buy from the general store. There'll be a package waiting for us. The drone will identify the package, pick it up. The package will have some sort of ID that only allows it to be picked up by my drone, by the ID being broadcast by my drone. So my drone will go in, pick up that package and bring it back to me. And that's cost nothing now because it was charged, the battery of the drone was charged by solar.
Yeah, no inputs. Well, apart from the sun.
Exactly, which is there anyway.
Well, and then
now we have zero cost.
I guess the argument then is that it's so much more mining for the batteries, but I don't know. I'm not savvy about all of that enough to even really have an opinion.
Yeah, the only problem with that argument is that lithium is the third most abundant element in the universe. We will never run out of lithium, which powers our batteries.
Well, and you could also have a hydrogen fuel cell, right? Just use your solar panel to split water into oxygen and hydrogen, then you got hydrogen. I don't know. It's all very futuristic.
Yeah. The fuel cell is a funny one because 5 years ago I was reading how fuel cell generators were going to be the thing of the future, and there would come a time when you wouldn't even have internal combustion generators because they'd be running off fuel cells. And then that just quietly went away. I don't know what happened with that.
I feel like they realized exactly how hard it would be.
Or they realized how little fuel that would take to run a fuel cell, and maybe that's not profitable for the right people. And the plan was nixed. But yeah, it seems to make sense to use solar panels to split water into hydrogen and oxygen and then make a very efficient fuel cell. But there was a time when that was really exciting technology. Then it just sort of faded away, and there was no explanation for why it went away.
I mean, there's that, but then do you think that's a worse blunder than the way we've shunned nuclear? That might be the worst mistake of the last 100 years.
Well, I think picking the wrong nuclear was
Yeah.
the worst one. We went uranium instead of thorium, and thorium is something that you can find on the. I could walk outside if I knew what the hell I was looking for and pick up some thorium.
Well, that's why they went with
It's
uranium, right? Because they didn't want the Russians to be able to just do it the day after, you know? So they picked
more than
something they
likely.
had, nobody else did.
Yeah. So that's a good example of how adversarial states have prevented a technology that cooperating individuals would have embraced.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point. That's a very specific example of how their monopoly on control has held us back for decades.
Exactly. One of the cleanest technologies known, thorium reactors, and we're not going to let that happen because what if the Russians get it?
I don't even understand the whole fuck up around thorium. It's insane to think. And meanwhile, nobody talks about it, you know? It's fringe still.
Yes, exactly. And now they're pumping billions and billions of dollars into fusion reactors, which don't work because they're missing the whole fundamental point of fusion, which is enough hydrogen collects in one place to form a star. And then that ignites. That's how fusion reactors work. They work with massive stars, not with these tiny things in front.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any sort of credentials in nuclear technology, but I've looked up a bunch about those thorium reactors, and they're sure fucking. It's a shame that we don't use them.
Mm-hmm. I think it's not profitable. Might be a different way of looking at it. Nuclear is much more. Uranium is much more profitable than thorium.
That's a pretty good point. If everybody had unlimited source of power that, didn't cost very much on the inputs, then where do they get their gleanings from?
Exactly. That's the pessimistic and probably realistic way of looking at it.
Yeah.
If there's not a profit to be made, why bother doing it? And if you've got the monopoly on the profit, then you can stop anyone else from doing it too.
That's like that goes to the education, where it's like they'll never give you the education you need to overthrow them, right?
Exactly.
Or not even overthrow, because when you say overthrow, there's like a negative connotation to that, but outgrow them or overgrow them.
Yes. The examples I use are Kodak and BlackBerry. That's government, and we didn't overthrow Kodak or BlackBerry. We didn't do anything violent towards them. We just didn't feel like using them anymore. And that may well become the way with government. We just won't feel like using it anymore.
We should discuss your specific example, because it seems like of all the people that I know, you have gone the farthest in escaping the government's clutches. You know what I mean? Like, you're pretty off grid, right?
Yes, I am. I guess in the end, there's a number of reasons why I can get away with this. The first one is trees. It comes down to the old thing: you can't complain about what you can't see. And if you can't see me from the road as you're driving by, you don't know what's going on there. There's nothing to complain about. And there's also the third level of government, the local government. They are very much complaints driven, unlike the federal government, which is very proactive in interfering in people's lives. Local government just wants to be left alone, I think. And if they're not getting complaints, they don't care.
Right. Yeah, they don't have the dudes looking for stuff in a helicopter like the feds do.
Exactly. And they can't afford a helicopter, so they haven't got time to do stuff like that. A little bit different in America, where your sheriff's departments are getting military off-casts. That's a very unique thing. Most local governments don't get the pleasure of having off-casts on the military. They'll have to make do with what they've got.
Yeah, I can't really speak to America. I'm in Canada. We are both.
Yes.
We are both in ex-British colonies. It's interesting.
And the other interesting thing about that is rather than violently overthrowing our government, we just didn't use them anymore. We just stopped using the British Empire and sort of turned away and did our own thing, which seems the much more natural way of doing it.
Yeah, but do you think that we could have done that if America hadn't left such a bad taste in their mouth? You know what I mean? Like if they hadn't experienced such a defeat in America of holding on to a colony that wanted free, maybe they would have put up a fight when we tried to leave.
Oh, but we didn't leave. I don't think Australia, Canada, India's a little bit different, but Australia and Canada never left. We just sort of
That's a good point.
used them less and less over time. The Queen is still our monarch, our head of state, but no one takes that seriously. Nothing's changed legally about the Queen being head of state. We just don't really pay attention to it anymore. And it would never occur to the Queen of England to tell Australia or Canada what to do, even though she still has in writing, she still has the same powers that she had, but it would never occur to her to tell us what to do because we just go, oh, no, we don't really use you anymore.
Yeah,
so it's become very symbolic.
What would happen if she did? Do you think we would listen? I don't think so.
I think our politicians would be very diplomatic and say the right things, say the consoling things, and do in public do the right, and then just do nothing about it.
Yeah.
So yes, we'll consider that. We'll take it on board, and yeah, life will go on because yeah, they have no real power over us anymore. And keeping on, we never left. We still haven't left, but we don't have anything to do with them anymore.
The politicians would probably just push it off until the next guy was elected. You know, not my problem anymore.
Or just say, yeah, we'll get on that, and it just never happens. I mean, what's she going to do? Send frigates over?
Oh man,
the British government sort of don't really listen to what the monarchy is doing now either. They do their symbolic thing of getting the Queen's permission to dissolve Parliament, but they could do that whether or not they asked to.
Dude, I really wish that we still lived in a world that had tall wooden ships. Like, that would be awesome.
Late medieval or just early Renaissance. That seems to be the golden era.
Yeah.
When all the good stuff was happening. But you also had cholera and tuberculosis and plague. So yeah, it wasn't all nice.
I kind of think we're in the golden era, don't you, Shudra?
Yes, definitely. We're in a transitional period between one era and another is always a fun place to be. And I think the Renaissance is also the same because you were going from heads of state, thinkers, moving into the merchant era because that's just where the first ships were going off, discovering other places and setting up trading posts.
Yeah, the discovery of America.
And the British East India Company. So that was the very birth of the merchant era. So that was also a transitional period going from thinkers to merchants. So, and we're in a transitional period between merchants and peasants 2.0. So perhaps that is one of the signs of a golden era, is you're on that cusp between two definite social cycles.
It's a little bit scary though, because there was that era where they went from the horse to the car, and that basically got us both world wars, right? The mechanization and
yes, industrialization of killing people.
Exactly. Although it's a little bit more complicated than that. Although I don't know if World War One could have been the same if they still only had horses.
The magnitude might have been different, but I think they would have had I think their squabbles that led to the both wars would have happened on a much smaller scale. We just technology just allowed the industrialization of war.
That's quite the tangent. We probably shouldn't go into world wars. That's a rabbit hole. Let's get back to your off-grid.
Off-grid, yes.
I remember seeing a post you had put up where one of your trees had died from drought, and it had given away some of your stealthing. You know, they could see from the
Yeah,
road part of your area, and that was pretty interesting. That's a good point. What they can't see, they can't whine about.
exactly. And since then, my undergrowth, my second layer trees have sprung up, and they're blocking what those original overstory trees were blocking. So that's a good thing. And it's all just about growing more and more trees. The more trees I grow, or the more acacias I grow, which are the fireproof ones,
Yeah.
the less people can see what's going on. And the other thing is ask first, apologise later. Apologise rather than ask permission. Most of what I do is legal. And it's just that if I'm not bothering anyone and there's no one to complain, I get away with it.
Yeah.
Producing your own electricity is, in a place like Australia where you have regulation upon regulation and exclusive cartels about who has the license to do something, it would cost tens of thousands of dollars for me to do what I've done with my off-grid electricity, but I've done it for a few $1,000s.
Nice.
Simply because, and it's from nothing more than circumventing all those regulations and all the additional things that would have to be put into place to meet those regulations. That's where the extra zeros come onto the cost of doing anything, is to comply with government regulations.
Yeah, you got to
take
feed
that away, and
sorry, you got to feed that mafia middleman.
exactly. You can safely add a zero to the cost of anything that has to comply with government. It just gives you an idea of how much, and that money being wasted. I, as an individual, could spend a lot less money doing something that I would have to spend to comply with the government, and they've done precisely nothing to contribute to that, except write these violent laws that demand that extra zero be put on my cost.
Yeah, that's like that's what Rothbard says in the Anatomy of the State, where he says that the state only ever takes. It provides nothing that you can't do.
And their regulations are for my own safety, is what they say. What if an unlicensed person did something dangerous? It's like, no, I'm pretty sure the way I've set up my electric is safer than normal because I don't want to die.
Yeah.
And that's the most important thing to me, is my own safety and the safety of anyone who comes to visit me is paramount. So I've made it so that my electricity is done above code. The book I was using, I bought a book from the US from a master electrician. He wrote this book about wiring up a house, and he had, each chapter was how to wire, how to do a certain job to code, and then at the end of the chapter he'd have this thing called above code, and he'd tell you how to do it beautifully.
Yeah.
And fail safe, and far beyond what you would ever be asked to do by government. And I would do it that way.
Of course. Why wouldn't you want to do it as professionally as you can?
Exactly. And it still didn't cost me anything because I didn't have to pay the fees to meet all these, have all these checks and have professionals come out and do it. I mean, wiring is not difficult. It's red is to red, black is to black, and earth is to earth. I mean, how hard is that to learn? You don't need a 3-year apprenticeship to learn that.
No, that's, again, just slipping some money to the mafia middleman.
Exactly.
Oh, jeez.
What
So
else?
Carry on.
I was just about to go on to my sanitation, my toilets, but were you going to ask something?
Well, I mean, I was just going to say, well, that's how you're off-grid electrically. So you are 100% off-grid electrically?
I am, yes. That's why I had the generator on earlier today, because it was a bit cloudy, so I just give the batteries a bit of a boost.
Absolutely.
So,
do you have any sort of wind turbines?
No, and that's something I do want to get, because at night time I'm purely on batteries, so I keep my power consumption to the minimum. And sometimes I can hear this stiff breeze blowing outside, and I'm thinking, gosh, if I had a wind turbine, I could use a lot more electricity at night, because that thing is producing probably a couple of 100 watts worth of power, that wind. So yeah, that will be the next step.
I saw a really amazing video from this guy from Nova Scotia where he made the DIY 3 kilowatt Reaper turbine. I think his name is James Bigger, Bigar. It was amazing, and he's got all the blueprints available.
Oh yeah.
You would really like that video. He shows you the entire process. He makes it all from scratch. Like, he even winds all his own stator coils to make the generator.
Oh,
Oh, it's
that's pretty
amazing.
impressive.
And he makes like a vacuum seal and epoxy lines it all, so it's just fucking so much better than anything you could get off the shelf, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what it
Oh,
costs them in total, but that's what we're talking about. Like, that's the future.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's also you can find articles about people who make Fisher and Paykel washing machines. I don't know if you're familiar with that type of washing machine, but instead of having a motor that runs a pulley that spins the drum,
Yeah.
the entire drum is the motor.
Yeah.
So they just make a very large motor into the drum. So what they do is these people take the drum out, which is a motor, and mount fans on that, and that becomes a wind turbine with almost no modification to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's basically just a giant ass generator with those magnets and coils.
Exactly, yeah. And those you can even leave the drum as it is and just put attach fins to that drum itself.
That's a really good idea.
So there's a bit of that happening.
That's more of like reusing things than DIY, like making them from scratch, you know? And both are very good.
Yeah, I'm very big on the 3 R's, which is reduce, reuse, and recycle. Recycling is, yeah. If you find yourself recycling something, you haven't thought hard enough. Is my policy on that one. Try and reuse it as many times as you can until there's nothing left. Just scrap. Then think about recycling it.
You know, that's a pretty neat tie-in to your sanitation. It's almost like we planned that.
Well, who says we didn't?
Yeah, I admit nothing.
Yeah, so it's pretty much, it's so simple how correct sanitation is. My setup is nothing more than a 5-gallon bucket, but I've built a very nice wooden toilet frame around it with a comfortable wooden toilet seat. So you can't see the bucket because it's inside this beautiful wooden frame.
Enclosure thing, yeah.
Enclosure. So there's nothing unsafe about that. It's as comfortable, if not more comfortable, than your typical off-the-shelf toilet that people buy. Yes, it doesn't waste any water. So, and with my buckets, I normally have about 20 buckets on the go at a time, simply so that I can, if I need to dig a big hole for, say, a new garden bed or some trees that I want to grow, I can just tip them in. And what I typically do is dig the hole, tip all the contents in, cover that with mulch for about a month. I've dug up one of these holes after a month to put a tree in, and it's been full of worms. You wouldn't even know what that was beforehand. Everything's disappeared. It just looks like dark, black, rich soil full of worms. I don't know where the worms came from. They weren't there in the bucket. They just magically appear.
You hope.
Well, yeah, but they are earthworms. So
I was just kidding.
And on that note, with all the human manure that I've been putting in my garden, today it's end of February at the moment. This is supposed to be the hottest, driest part of the year, and I have mushrooms. I went for a walk this morning. I have mushrooms popping up everywhere because we had a couple of days rain. So and that mycelium layer only exists because of the human manure, because that was just gravel before. So that's there simply because of what I've been doing. Instead
Great success.
Wasting water, flushing the contents down the toilet to be someone else's problem. They've ended up in my garden producing mushrooms.
Fuck. In Quebec, they just pour it straight into the St. Lawrence. Millions and millions and millions of gallons from those big cities. Untreated.
Yep. And there's no way the organisms that live in rivers can deal with that.
No.
That's a horrible way of doing it.
Well, that's technically that's part of the ocean, so it would be salt water. But again, like that's such a that's a surplus of whatever is in that. I guess lots and lots of nitrogen and whatever's in
Yeah,
feces.
mainly nitrogen. So you get your nitrogen blooms, your algal blooms, and yeah, over fertility. But if you think about how many animals live in a forest and they're all defecating all day, every day, you walk through a forest, it's not covered in feces.
No, it decomposes.
You would be. Yeah, I mean, there are people who specialise in finding feces to try and determine what sort of animal lives in there. It's gone within a few days. So that is obviously the natural way to dispose of feces is in a forest.
Well, I mean, that's a good example of a natural ecosystem, but then you get what is most common in a lot of places where it's just hundreds and hundreds of acres that is stripped and tilled, and then any sort of rain just washes everything off, and
Yeah. Yeah, that's the worst possible way of doing anything. To do it as a monoculture. Just have you have your trees, and you dig a little hole, and you dump the contents of the bucket in the hole, cover it with mulch, walk away, and a few weeks later, you wouldn't even know it was there. And you'll have mushrooms pop up. I can't think of a.
Sorry, carry on.
I can't think of a safer, more sanitary way of doing it than that.
The only thing I can think of that would be like a safety concern is underwater. Underground water. But I guess in Australia, that's pretty much not a concern, right?
For most of the place, there are some places where groundwater would be a problem. But then the method I'm using is based on a method developed by a guy named Joseph Jenkins. Now, he doesn't recommend you compost the human manure the way I do it. This is my own invention. His invention was to make a compost bin, line it with hay, you dump the contents in the middle, and you cover that with hay. And then you keep building up until it's like a couple of meters high, and then you wall that off. And he recommends you let that decompose for 2 years, and you move on to the next bin, and you fill up the second bin for a year. Then when you get to your third bin and you start filling that up, you can start using the contents of the first bin, which by 2 years is just
compost.
More than it's just compost.
Yeah.
So if you have a high water table, that you do it the correct way.
Yeah.
I can get away with doing the way I'm doing it is because I have bottomless gravel with no water. So all I'm doing is benefiting the soil by pouring it directly into a hole.
Absolutely.
But yeah, the correct way of doing the method is how you would do it if you have waterlogged or high water table.
Yeah, or like big spring melt, where the snow melts in the spring and takes so much water into the system at once.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, even then, you'd have high areas. You would, if you needed to, you would channel your water and make a high dry area. And on that high area, you put your compost bins.
That's a good point. You would just use proper management.
Exactly. Having a property that completely floods in winter is poor property management. What you would do is you would get your heavy machinery and you would dig the low spots lower and the high spots higher. So now you have wet and dry areas, and now you've got something to work with. So once you've got an area that will, no matter how big the spring flood is, it will never get wet, you can work with that. But having a constant depth that gets completely flooded, that's just poor management.
Absolutely. It's kind of amazing to me how so many people are just absolutely terrible at water management because it's so easy. You just need to use gravity to your advantage. And like I've seen people around where I am, where we do get so much spring melt, they just create a bunch of swales, funnels it all into one big dugout, and their winter melt is enough water to supply their entire operation for the entire summer. And then, you have winter again and it's full by the next year.
Yep. Exactly. Rather than just your spring melt being a time of horror because the water's just washing everything away, you're now making it work for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a couple
I
swales.
was exactly. I was watching many years ago. I saw a documentary called Water Wars. It's all about the what's happening with corporations stealing groundwater around the world. And at the end, they were talking about solutions that anyone can supply. And one of the easiest, simplest solutions that they are doing with villages in Africa is just to tell them to dig a hole if there's rain coming. Just get a shovel and dig a simple hole, a few holes around the house, and the water will collect in there. Instead of washing away, it just collects in there. And
Yeah.
that's not much, but it's better than nothing.
And it doesn't bake
And
off in the sun.
yeah, like you said, using gravity to your advantage, just a shovel, digging a simple hole, and you've made the situation better than it would have been if that hole wasn't there. There's nothing worse for rain than flat
Yeah.
ground.
And then the sun bakes it all off, right?
Exactly. When you've got holes and hills and mounds, you've got texture, you've got shady areas, you've got sunny areas. You're starting to get your microclimate happening.
Doesn't it just absolutely blow your mind how the things that we're discussing seem like caveman shit, you know? But on the other hand, it's kind of at the tip of the spear. Like, not a lot of people worry about this stuff. They just plug into the grid and they let everything be provided for them.
Mm-hmm. And their method of land management is to get laser levels out and with bulldozers and graders and make it perfectly level flat so that their remote controlled $1 million tractors can sow the wheat more efficiently. And they think that's the way to go.
100%.
But then the rains come along and wash it all away.
Or if it's perfectly flat, you just get a sinkhole somewhere, and good luck getting that fixed.
Yeah, especially if your $1 million tractor drives into it.
Oh, I've sunk heavy equipment into sinkholes. It's not a fun time. Up to the axles, 6-wheel drive grader with a mold board that you can use to paddle, and you still get stuck. That's just actually super embarrassing.
Yeah, I could imagine.
But like you're saying, it's because the land management, there's just these random bogs that have no reason to exist.
Mm-hmm. When the better thing would have been to scoop that bog out and make it into more of a bog. Now you've got yourself a little trout farm.
Well, you could do that if it wasn't 3 feet beside a gravel road.
Well, I guess somebody built that gravel road in the wrong place.
Absolutely. Well, like you're saying, water management. If they just didn't have it all draining into that intersection,
Mm-hmm. Or if the water does want to drain into that intersection, then the intersection goes somewhere else, and we turn that into a lake.
Absolutely.
If the water wants to go somewhere, well, make something wet out of it. Make a pond, make a lake. Don't fight the water. Work with the water.
That's funny you say that. There's a notorious highway between the town I live in and a town just a little bit to the west, where they built the highway over basically a swamp, and they have to redo it pretty much every year because every year the frost heaves are just unbelievable. And everybody always complains, well, why can't they learn to pave the road? But it's just, why would they put the road over a swamp?
Exactly. I mean, that swamp has a bank that goes around the swamp. It would have been easy enough to find that bank and build the road on that bank. So it makes a little bit of a curve. And there you've got this beautiful scenic swamp to drive by every day.
You would hope.
Look at the birds. Yeah.
But that was back in the day when it was just, put them in straight lines. It's flat. Why wouldn't you?
Exactly. Oh, we've got housing estates down in Perth where they're building on floodplains because they're perfectly flat. There's no need to grade them.
What could go wrong?
What a perfect place to build a housing estate. What could possibly go wrong every 100 years?
Oh, I know. It's crazy. Your climate kind of went a little bit insane down there, hey, with all those fires?
Yes. Yeah. November was a weird month. That's supposed to be the end of spring, the last of the cold before summer starts, and we were having mid 40s mid 40s is not pleasant in the middle of summer, let alone in spring. That was, yeah, that was a
I
little insane.
my mind boggles at the idea of mid 40s temperatures. That's just ugh,
I mean,
so
yeah,
hot.
it's bad enough in the middle of summer. When it happens outside of summer, that just makes it so much worse, because you know it shouldn't be. It should be mid 30s at that time of the year, not mid 40s.
That's
And
crazy.
now, at the end of February, start of March, it's supposed to be the hottest part of the year. This is when we're supposed to have our mid 40s and dry, and it's been raining for 4 days.
So
So
this is your peak summer?
this is peak summer right now, but yeah, it's cold. I think it's forecast high 20s today, and it's overcast, and it's been raining for 4 days.
Do you
So
think that might
yeah,
have something to do with all of the soot in the air? All those rain particles forming around soot?
it's possible.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
it's all
possible. This
hearsay.
stuff. Yeah. I mean, yeah. This. I guess summers aren't constant. You have rain periods during summer, but yeah, it's just that we had our peak of summer in spring, and now in peak of summer we're having what you would think was spring weather. So it's all a bit messed up.
It's funny how parallel that is to what's happening to the winter up here. The winter up here is really weird. We're getting the beginning of winter when it usually snaps cold and we get our first snow and it stays on the ground. Now we're getting lots and lots of months of ice rain, and it keeps going under and over freezing, so it'll melt and then freeze solid and then come back again and then melt. It's just it's a wild situation we're getting. And I don't know, it's happened the last 2 years in a row. People say that these are just cyclical things, but it doesn't seem good, you know.
I mean, I can see how that would be caused by climate change, because global warming is nothing more than an increase in energy, not necessarily an increase in temperature. Now, energy can make ice storms, energy can make monsoons, energy can make droughts. It can make your seasons all messed up.
Yeah,
And
it's not global
it's
warming, it's just extreme weather, unpredictable.
yeah. Well, the global warming is giving you the energy which is driving extreme weather. It doesn't necessarily have to make it hot. It can make it. Energy can drive a polar vortex. It can give you an ice age if the energy is working in the right way,
Yikes.
and melts Greenland, which stops the North Atlantic conveyor, and suddenly North America gets itself an ice age in the middle of global warming.
See, that's interesting. That's and you know, at the same time we have grand solar minimum with just unbelievable, like, things we don't understand being pumped towards us. The sun's putting out more magnetized stuff than it is putting out light
Mm.
or something. Like, I'm not a scientist, but the things I've been reading about it are kind of alarming.
Yeah, and the way we're treating the environment with cutting down all the trees and growing our monocrops, all that's doing is making any small variations in temperature have a magnifying effect on our crops, because they're unstable to begin with. So with this increase in unstable weather, what we should naturally be doing is making more stable crops, which is forest.
Yeah, the ecosystem, the thousands of interacting species instead of the one.
Whether or not you can argue that they're more efficient or a better way of feeding us, they will withstand the extremes better than a monoculture will. A wheat field,
100%.
a forest of mixed fruits is going to survive a drought or a flood or an ice storm better than a wheat field is going to.
Well, and you also got to keep in mind all the things in the understory, like all of the creepy crawlies and the critters that live off of those fruit trees and the things they draw.
Yes, exactly. I mean, you can argue the diversity and environmental aspect of it, but with profit-driven people, I find it better to argue the bottom line with them. And the bottom line is that a forest, you will see better profits from a forest, a fruit forest, during extreme weather than you will from a wheat field, which could be wiped out by a single hailstorm.
Oh,
Whereas
100%.
whereas you might lose 20 to 30% of your forest crops during a hailstorm. So there's a time and place to argue the environment, and there's also a time and place to argue your profit, your bottom line, your dollar.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to avoid talking about the environment in a doom gloom way because it's just not helpful. A lot of people just shut it out. They think in really regimented, either you're with us or against us, and if you're saying
Yep.
this, then. But I don't know. I try to think about it like you're saying, which one is the most survival oriented, like how are we the safest?
Or how are we the most profitable over all extremes?
Yeah, no
So
matter what the variables are.
Exactly. You run the risk of 100% loss of a wheat field during a hailstorm, but a carefully managed forest, you're not going to get a loss. You're going to get small losses, but you're not going to lose everything because it's just so inherently stable.
Yeah, and if you do get a loss in one category, maybe you get a gain in another just because of the variety.
Exactly. You got your fruits, you got your nuts, you've probably got truffles, you've got your bush berries. You might even have a pond in there with fish. You've got so many smaller sources of income coming from that forest that they're not all going to get wiped out by an extreme weather event. You're going to have something come through. Whereas your monoculture in your wheat field, that can be so easily taken out by a locust plague. Just comes through in one day and wipes everything out, and leaves.
Or
just lost everything.
Or even just snow. Like that's a huge factor up here. That's why a lot of the farmers here grow canola because canola, once you've cultivated it and you've got it all sitting in those rows, right, to get baled, at that point, if it snows and it's wheat, the crop is a write-off for human food. They have to give it to cattle. But if it's canola, it's not damaged and you can still use it for human grade. And so that's why a lot of farmers go with canola up here, just because it's a safe bet. If we do get that early snow, you're not going to lose so much of your profit by having to turn it into basically silage.
And the problem with that, of course, is now you've got this crop that is resilient, but now you have to invent uses for that crop. Whereas where you might not have had a use for it, you're going to have to invent something because you've got so much of it. Everyone's decided to go with the safe crop. Now we have this surplus of canola oil. There's only so much you can do with canola oil.
Yeah, it's crazy. And just think about how badly it competes with hemp oil. Like, although, then again, who knows if hemp would actually finish in the seasons up here. Like, seasonally, we have such a short summer with so few days of good growing degree temperatures. It's a hard call, which is the smartest option. I mean, cattle obviously are a very good option, but you would like to mix that into a cycle with something else, right?
Exactly. And also, the best place for cattle to live is in a forest.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Rather than on a field. So now you've got yet another revenue stream, which is your cattle that are living in the forest, moving from sector to sector, being rotationally grazed.
I've seen some pretty inspirational farmers where they grow a late season field of corn, and then it obviously doesn't finish, but it gets enough that when they let their cattle into there, the cattle graze down all those half-grown corn heads, and they get basically corn finished beef, but they can do it in a natural pasteurized setting.
And if you're running your legumes through there, like your soy or your lupins or your clovers, cows are going to trample that into the soil. So you'll probably end up with healthier fields the next year.
Yeah, and if you can combo that with some overstory, I'm trying to think of a tree orchard crop that grows around here, but there really aren't very many.
Maple?
Yeah, but that doesn't really drop fruit, I was thinking, I I mean, high bush cranberry, blueberry, we kind of have more like low growing fruiting crops.
Acorns, or is it too far north for acorns?
Yeah, we can't grow oaks here. They don't make it through the winter.
Oh, okay.
Um, I love this kind of thinking though, trying to make everything a component of a cycle that has benefits to other parts of the wheel.
I'm wondering if you managed the whole thing correctly. What trees would grow as part of a diverse forest, rather than trying to grow a tree in isolation? It might not survive. Whereas if it had beneficial trees around it, maybe it's got a much better chance of surviving.
That's a very good point. Yeah. I mean, and the climate is changing drastically. Like,
There is that too.
who knows what a baby oak tree would do these days?
And mulberries, they can go pretty cold, can't they? Or is a bit too cold for mulberries up there?
I think we can grow mulberries here. Um, I've heard of people that grow mulberries and then they let their ducks go through underneath and clean up all the dropped berries. I think Jack
Oh,
Spargo
yeah.
was talking about that.
And cows would love mulberry leaves. They'd,
Yeah.
they'd keep them nice and trimmed as well. And plus, now you got your manure content in there. I'm thinking walnuts or oaks would probably survive in a mulberry forest.
It's more about the cold snap that gets so deep into the tree that it just kills off the vascular system. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. When I think about like my pipe dream sort of situation where I get my hands on some land to my name, um, I mostly focus on cloning lots and lots of local, like locally available trees, the things that are already thriving here, just trying to increase the biomass, um, like birch trees, aspen trees, poplar trees, all those sorts of things have no problem up here. But the problem is they don't have very much like tertiary benefits.
Poplar is a feed tree, isn't it? I believe stock can eat poplar leaves. Where do I remember reading that, hearing that? That was on a podcast somewhere. Maybe it was one of Spurko's podcasts. He was talking about poplar trees
I'm sure they
having.
could, like a really little baby poplar, but the problem with poplars is they're so freaking invasive. Once you get poplars, it's kind of like a fungus, it just gets everywhere.
That's a
Um,
good thing.
it's
Now
true.
you've got yourself a dense forest.
That's
If
absolutely true.
if it if poplars can take over, then they can change the microclimate and they can let other stuff come in. So
You're,
if something's if a tree's a weed, I'm all about letting that thing go. See how far it can go. See
that's
what it can
totally
do to
true.
the.
But what if what if it shades over your understory? Like, what if you're trying to grow a whole bunch of blueberry bushes and then you get these poplars growing everywhere? It's just kind of hard to manage. But you're not wrong. It's
Um,
better to get that microclimate.
yeah, and it sounds. I'm imagining poplars can be used for structural.
Oh God, no,
They have structural use. No,
no.
to.
They grow differently here, I think, than they do in other places. Because I've heard people say that poplar is a hardwood, but up here,
Mm-hmm.
poplars are notoriously like foam. They
Ah,
they're actually they're pretty dangerous to walk through a poplar forest because the top 20 feet will just rot right off, and then a gust of wind comes along, and all of a sudden a 20-foot chunk of tree just falls right on you. Um,
okay.
so they're not very structurally sound at all. The wood is basically only useful for hugelkultur, actually.
Oh, okay. Well, there's a thought too.
It's true. It's very useful for that. Um, you do a lot of hugelkultur, hey?
I do, yes. Yeah, that's how I dispose a lot of the wood that's no good for firewood. I just make a pile, throw some dirt on it, and keep piling it up. And around the base is where I dig my human manure holes. So I like to put a legume at each corner, and then put a fruit tree in the middle. So I try to make square hugelkultures, or our pyramid hugelkultures,
I
and
was
then
thinking
put a
pyramid,
legume.
yeah.
Yeah, put a legume tree at each corner for the nitrogen, and then stick a fruit tree in between them. So all around the base is trees. And they're also shading the hugelkultur, and the hugelkultur is obviously holding the moisture and feeding the roots during the summer.
Absolutely. That's just the perfect adaptation to the dry Australian climate. Hey, all those hugelkulturs.
Definitely. Yeah. And yeah, instead of making a tiny little compost bin, all you're doing is making this massive compost pile and just throwing anything that's combustible or compostable, just throwing it on there. Just keep piling it up, and they keep falling down as they decompose, and you just keep piling them up. So it's a constant compost bin.
Do you ever do burns? Do you ever controlled burn areas? No.
I don't do any burns, because you can argue whether burns are effective or not, but my entire argument against burns is 80% of your fertility disappears into the air and smoke, goes into your neighbour.
It's true.
So if I make a hugelkultur, I get 100% of that piece of wood's fertility. Whereas if I set fire to it, yes, what is left, the ash that's left is highly fertile, but it's a fraction, like 2% or something of that log that I set fire to. Where's it gone? It's gone in smoke. Carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, that's just floated away into the atmosphere.
And you still have all that carbon in the tree. It's not like you're gaining carbon by burning it. You're just turning it into a granular
gas.
Well, I mean the ash.
You're also turning it. Oh, the ash. Yeah, the soot. The soot floats away and lands somewhere else that isn't my property, and also a lot of it gets turned into carbon dioxide in the oxidation process.
Yeah.
That goes into the atmosphere. Now, I'm not even arguing that the CO2 is bad for the atmosphere. That CO2 should have gone in my ground.
Yeah. Carbon, right?
As long chain sugars, as the fungus breaks it down. It shouldn't have gone into CO2 and floated over hundreds of kilometers away from my home. So that's my biggest argument against.
Sorry, carry on. That's your biggest argument against?
Against burning is that most of my carbon goes away, whereas I want to keep my carbon in the ground.
That's a good point. What about if it was, for instance, like this might not be a thing for you, but like burning a grassland, that's you coat the entire area with carbon.
You depending on if there's a breeze or not, you might coat the neighbouring area in carbon. I mean, they get the benefit, but now your little field that you set fire to has lost how many tons of carbon because it floated away. And CO2, again, most of the burning forms CO2 as part of the process, which floats up into the atmosphere. You've lost that. That's not coming back until you've put some trees in which have absorbed the CO2 out of the atmosphere.
I agree that we should avoid the whole is CO2 a negative impactor. That's not a productive argument.
No, and you've got, it's too divisive. My argument for reducing CO2 production is that you're losing that CO2, which you should be keeping because it's so valuable to your soil. That's my complete argument against burning, is that you're losing the carbon in the form of CO2.
That's a smart way to look at it.
Because again, now I'm targeting the bottom line. A climate denier, industrialist doesn't care that that his CO2 is polluting the atmosphere, but he might care that he's losing that carbon in the form of CO2, which could have gone into building his fertility, which he now has to replace with synthetic fertilizer. So that's a much better argument to use for a climate denier. Is you're losing the CO2, not the atmosphere is gaining the CO2.
And it took so long to get that, right? Like through years and years of photosynthesis, it built up those complex carbon chains, and then it's just gone.
Oh yeah, a decent tree, it's been 100 years of sucking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere to turn that into sugar, which then turns into lignin to form its wood. And then a few minutes of fire and it's back in the atmosphere again. Yeah, that's wasted a lot of energy.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's I only ask because traditionally, way back in the day, before settlers came here, the Indians used to torch the prairies.
Yep.
And I mean, I don't know. I've also heard an argument that the reason the prairies were so fertile is because of the roaming buffalo, which acted kind of like regenerative grazing. But then there's also the argument that they're fertile because of all that biochar.
Mm-hmm. Or you could, you've got the other argument by Randall Carson that those valleys are so fertile because of the runoff from that meteor strike 11,000 years ago that caused all that floodwater to rush across the plains.
Yeah,
and that dropped all that sediment down.
When that one glacier melted and the whole floodwater is unleashed.
Yep, the whole half the continent just got covered in sediment. That would make very fertile soil. And that sounds like a good explanation too. But with the Indians doing their burning, I have to ask the question, would they have burnt their prairies if they had access to a slasher?
Probably not, right? But
the only reason you're burning is because you don't have a slasher to slash that hay or that grass and then let that soak into the soil.
Yeah,
and the orders of magnitude more fertility.
There's no competition between a slasher. Is that what you call that? When you just flatten it down, cut
it down. Yeah, that thing. What do you call
it? I would just have called it a combine.
Oh, a combine picks up the seed heads and throws them in the bin. That's driving alongside it, I would have thought. A slasher doesn't collect any seed heads. It just takes it to the ground and leaves it.
Oh, I understand the process. It's more like a lawnmower that doesn't fling it anywhere. It just drops it where it gets cut, right?
Yes. Yeah. Whereas a combine is a lawnmower with a catcher.
Yeah. I mean, up here, the combines are so goddamn industrialized that they do everything, right? They're jack of all trades. They're like, so I just assume any big machine going over a field, I can call a combine,
Yes, because it more than likely, and it costs millions of dollars, and you never own it because who can afford that?
God, no. You're in debt your entire life. Even your kids are in debt because you have such a nice combine.
And that's the difference between going from a 10-acre or 30-acre property where you have a tractor where everything gets hitched to the back of the tractor and you paid for it, you own all of it, to these 1,000-acre farms where you have to have $1 million combine that you'll never own, your kids will never own.
Oh gosh, I mean, 1,000 acres sounds small. Like there's 1,000 hectare.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's wild.
And there's no way a medium tractor with stuff that you hitch on the back is going to work 1,000 hectares. You need your $1 million combine to do that.
I worked on a farm pulling discs with a tractor, and I did 400 hectares, and it took me a week. But I was making pretty good time, and that was a pretty big tractor. Like, it wasn't mine. None of this. Yeah. I'm just an employee at all stages.
Yes.
But that was pretty fun. That was a great job. I really enjoyed that. Sorry, I'm a little distracted here. My hockey game's in the third period, 5 minutes left, and we're down by 1 goal.
Oh no.
And we're against those dirty rat bastard Toronto Maple Leafs.
Tribalism, I love it.
Yeah. You want to get to the root of the whole tribal monkey and a human, you go for their sports team. I guess you don't have hockey down there. You've got rugby, right?
Yeah, rugby, Australian football, cricket. I don't follow sports myself, so I'm trying to think. Basketball's pretty big. Soccer's sort of big. Yeah, that's about it. But, yeah, cricket in the summer and Australian football in the winter is pretty much the two big sports.
Cricket is insane to me. I can't even wrap my head around it. There's no time limit, right? It'll just go until it's over.
Oh no. There's definitely time limits. Yeah, in the test matches, the long ones, 5 days. So
5 days?
Get it all done in 5 days, yeah. And you might not have an outcome at the end.
See, of course I can't wrap my head around that.
Yeah, I don't know how that came about. You have a sporting event go for 5 days.
Do people stay and watch the whole thing?
Yeah. Yeah, people are transfixed by it. It's insane.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. Oh. Back to the topic. Sorry, that's a huge tangent right there.
Very much so, yes.
So we've covered your off-grid electric. We've covered your off-grid human manure systems. Did a little bit of hugelculture. I guess that leaves a gaping hole on water.
Water's just, we have tanks. We have water tanks. That's pretty much it.
Right,
So
cisterns.
the roof, yep, cisterns, yeah, that's what they call it. Gutters collect all the runoff from the roof and it gets sent down into the tank. And yeah, you try and make I got a 100,000 litre tank, so you try and make that last over the summer.
And then it refills over the winter, hey?
It refills over the winter, yeah, unless you get a summer shower like I've had for the last few days, which helps top it up a little bit.
That's interesting. And you use that for everything, and I guess you would just treat your drinking water?
Not even. Drinking water straight out of the tap because it's coming off the tank, which is as pure as you can possibly get. I mean, yeah, tank water is delicious compared to normal mains water, grid water.
Oh, I believe that.
Nothing added to it.
I believe that. Our water is pretty appalling here. You can't even water plants with it.
Yeah. But no, tank water is just delicious.
Well, that's interesting.
That's a typically Australian thing, though, to have the tanks. Collecting water off roofs, that's a very Australian thing.
And I've seen pictures of your koi. You've got a big old koi pond somewhere?
Oh, yes, yep. That's supposed to turn into an aquaponics, but the koi has become more fun. And I keep putting all these water lilies in and enjoying that. So at the moment, I don't actually have any grow beds coming off the aquaponics ponds, which is a shame. But,
is it though? If it's
happen.
Beautiful and you enjoy it, seems worth it.
Oh yeah, definitely. And that's the thing about the koi pond is at the moment I have a very typical aesthetic koi pond, which at any stage you just need to hook a grow bed up to it, and suddenly you've got food production. So that might be an interesting way of showing what can be done, is to take my typical suburban koi pond and turn it into an aquaponic system rather than making an aquaponic system from scratch.
Yeah.
So
well, I mean, you could also you could harvest the koi water, right, and not have it into a cycle. You could just use it as an input.
I have a solids tank which separates the sludge out from the water, and that's 1,000 litres. And what I do is every couple of weeks I will empty that solids tank onto my grapes. So I just pump that out onto the grapes, and I refill the koi pond with 1,000 litres of fresh water.
Yeah, you top it up.
That's doing a partial water change, and the grapes just love the sludge that comes out of the solid separator.
100%. That's exactly fish fertilizer, right?
Yeah, exactly what it is. It's the purest form of fish fertilizer.
I used to do pretty much exactly the same sort of setup, although I didn't have like a beautiful koi pond. I just had basically a giant bin where I kept my koi, and then I had a reservoir that I used for drip irrigation on an indoor cannabis grow. And what I would do is whenever I was changing my koi water, I would just dump the buckets into, it was a big old garbage bin, and I would dump the fish water into there, and then that would pump onto my plants and cycle back into the garbage bin, and then I would just top up the koi pond. So it's pretty much exactly like you're doing with your grapes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a good system.
Yeah, it was noticeable how much they really loved that.
Yeah, the fish love the fresh water, and your plants love that koi sludge or the pond sludge. That is probably as fertile as you can give anything.
Well, and it's also, the water's so clean, right? There's no chlorine, there's no tap residue, hard minerals.
Yep. I look into my koi pond and I can see the sludge on the bottom. It's messy on the bottom, but I can see it perfectly, which means the water between me and that sludge is crystal clear.
Yeah.
which is exactly how you want it to be.
How deep is your koi pond?
600 mils, so 2 foot.
Right.
Yeah. Which is, it's actually deeper than what most water lilies like. So I've got the water lilies sitting up on cinder blocks.
Yeah, elevated a bit.
Yeah, which also gives the koi somewhere to hide.
Yeah.
They like to live it. They shelter themselves in the cinder blocks, make them feel safe.
100%. When I moved that koi, like it was just a big cattle waterer, like a 6 foot by 4 foot and about 2.5 feet deep. When I moved that outside in the summer, I had a huge problem with the sun hitting it because it turned into green, just solid green because of all the light.
Yeah.
So I actually had to cover it up with a sheet of plywood. It was like it was inside again.
Yep. Yeah, that would have been perfect for water lilies. They would have loved that.
Exactly. Yeah, that would have been a perfect time to get one of those cinder blocks and some water lilies, and then the fish have some shade, water lilies have some support.
Yep. You've got beautiful flowers to look at, or even chestnuts, water chestnuts. They're good, and you get something to eat at the end. I have a few of those growing.
Sorry, I was always really tempted by water lilies. They're lotus flowers. Is that what you call them?
No, that's actually different. Lotuses are huge. They are massive. Like their leaves are a metre wide, type of thing. Water lilies are probably of the same family, but they're not the same as lotuses. Lotus is a very specific type of water lily that grows huge.
So the water lily is just basically what everybody thinks of as like the frog pad, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to grow. You'd need like a lake to grow a lotus in because they are massive. They are massive.
Well, where to from there? We talked a lot about agriculture. Should we get into the agorist political spectrum? Like that?
Could do that, or do we want to do a two-parter?
We could do. It seems appropriate to break this into 2 parts. It would be absolutely enjoyable to have you back on. I mean, that was definitely in the plans, no matter what, right?
Yeah, because we've done all the physical thing that an individual can do. The next logical step is how 2 individuals interact, which is just your gateway to your agorism.
Yeah, and also how that interaction can be used against the coercive state.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
In the Kodak fashion, not the revolution fashion.
Exactly. Yeah. Peaceful superseding or evolution rather than revolution.
Was it passive resistance, as Gandhi put
it? Gandhi.
Yeah.
Anyway, why don't we do that? Why don't we plan to do this another time? We've figured out the time zone difference. It's not so difficult.
Yes.
And yeah, I'll let you get about your day and also save some of your precious battery life.
Exactly. I'm hooked up to the power supply at the moment, so I'm pretty good. So that's not too bad. But yes, definitely we'll do part 2, which is how to apply all of this against the state.
With the Shudra way. We should plug you. We should plug you on Twitter. You are at the Shudra way.
Yes. And theshudraway.com is my website.
Oh, look at that.
With all the how-tos on how to do all this stuff.
Well, that's very awesome. It was awesome talking to you, Shudra.
Pleasure being here.
You have a good night. Or I guess a good day.
Good day, yes.
I'm never going to wrap my head around that.